Hello folks, I'm L.A. Little. This is your weekly TA wrap. Where we take a look at these markets from a neoclassical perspective and ask ourselves what happened today, actually what happened this week, and what does it tell us about the coming one. I do a show once a week, every Sunday night, live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time here on the base of the beautiful Rocky Mountains. Folks, I'm glad you could be with me. You know, it's hard to tune in on a weekend. A lot of people watch the show on YouTube now, actually. A number of people are starting to drift over to it, but one way or the other, watching archives. So I appreciate you that are the hardcore, stick it out, come join and be part of the show. I don't know if I'll have all that much time this evening. If you do have some questions, pop them in, and I'll try to get to it. What I have up here is the Trading Cube. It's one of the tools, Trading Cube scanner. And what it does is it allows you to look at the market and a set of stocks from a perspective of short, intermediate, and long term across the various stock sector and market, and to measure MTTF and some other things, but you can essentially pull up a list of stocks. One of the things I like to look for is something I call momentary weakness, which is where you have a bearish short-term trend and you have bullish on your intermediate and long. And I leave it all trends out here. You can filter it other ways, but essentially I'm looking for something that has pulled back, right, and that stock, and on the intermediate term and the long term, it's a bullish stock. It's just bearish on the short term. And a lot of times when you have weakness in a market, these guys will be the ones that are the ones to look at. Well, needless to say, right now, after about 6-7 weeks of going sideways to down, this market has a bunch of them. I mean, slews and slews and slews of them. And if I keep going, there's just a plethora. Matter of fact, there's almost 900 of them, and we only track about 8,000 stocks. So that's about every 1 in 8 stocks meet this condition. And a lot of times, some of the things I do is just look at things like this to give myself a feel for what the market feels like underneath, right? What's the majority of the stocks doing? Are they in this momentary weakness kind of situation, in which case they may just come bouncing right back out? Or is it more serious? And so some of the characteristics of the market, the scanner allows you to do that kind of stuff. And I was doing it right before the show started, so I thought I'd leave it on and just show it to you. As far as the market, what happened? Let's pop in here. Let's look at the indexes. Last week, if you remember, we were pushing down, right? We were pushing down. And then Tuesday, we actually got a spike up, and then came right back down, and that was off of the news that, not so much the news, we were off for Labor Day, and then we had the rest of the world trading. And the rest of the world was trading up while we were off. Of course, when we came back, we pushed up, met up with the rest of the world, but we couldn't hold it, and we closed near the lows, and volume expanded. And we didn't make it back to the top over here on the daily chart, and that made me believe Tuesday that this market was going to come down, try to break or at least test this support zone one more time. Wednesday, though, was a complete turnaround, and I had to flip around in my view, because if the market doesn't do technically what it should do, then you have to adjust to it, and that's what we did. And so now this market is trying to push up, and it pushed up Friday with a little bit more volume. So if you look at Thursday's volume, 1659.17, you did 29.5. You go over it, back underneath it, but you do 31. So you're probably going to come right back up and try it again. And then we'll see what it really wants to do. If we pull over to the weekly, because on the weekly we're trying to understand what's really happening in the big picture, 1635.53 was the low on the retest regenerate. So as we came back into that area, you know, we traded down the bottom of it and closed up inside of it. And then this week we've got, I think we've got an inside day still, 16, yeah, we still got an inside bar, not day, but a bar, so it's a week, inside, more volume, right? So this still is undecided about what it's going to do. And so looking at this chart, you know, you have to give a little bit greater odds that it's going to try to push higher. But that's not in any ways a done deal when you look at just the SPX. Also, when you look at the Dow, it's the same story. Matter of fact, the Dow still hasn't been able to get over and close over this high of 14,939 on the 27th bar. It closed inside of it again. That's 3 tries to get over and still hasn't done it. On the weekly, the Dow still looks terrible. There's really nothing nice about the way this chart looks. And so you can see on the SPX and particularly on the Dow, things are really struggling. But then you flip over to where the strength is, and that's the NDX and the NASDAQ. NDX, on the daily chart here. So they push it back down, go into support, flip it back around, come back up. They did the same sort of thing as they did on the SPX, but folks, they're going after a swing point high here on the 26th, and they're going after one on the 13th. They touched this one, closed underneath it, volume there 14. We did 16.5 into it. Volume at the top is 16.5. So we pushed into the top, 16,447. We pushed into it with 16,473. We're going to come right back at it, and we're going to try to break over it. Now, if the NDX starts pushing higher, it's probably going to take everything with it. As a matter of fact, you would rather see the tech stocks leading on the way up. If we look at it on the weekly, you can see how it's been consolidating. This is the 6th bar sideways, off the breakout, off the push up. And so you've got roughly, if you go back to the breakout bar, you've got 8 bars across. That's getting a little long in the tooth for a sideways type trend. So you have to be thinking that this thing's either going to break up or down. And again, if you go back to the daily chart, it's going to try to break out. If we go to the NASDAQ composite, which is a broader view of the same thing, technology, you got the same sort of scenario here where you push over, you got slightly more volume as you push over. You're going after 3 swing point highs on this one, and they're all clustered together. And if you look at it on the weekly, you got almost the same scenario that you're looking at on the NDX. You got the breakout bar, 8 bars across, consolidating. That also looks like it wants to try to break higher. And then if we go to the Russell, and if we look at the Russell on the daily, the Russell, almost like the SPX, or excuse me, on the Dow, is still playing with the 27th bar, can't get over it, coming right back up to it and testing it. And on this particular case, you got a swing point high the day before on the 26th, and you've also got your breakdown bar at the exact same area, 1039. Your swing point high is at 1044. That's going to be the critical area on the Russell. I think the Russell will be the pivotal one. It's been pushing up with some decent volume here. It did leave some volume at the bottom when it tried to break down. So if you go back and you look one more time at something like the IXIC, the NASDAQ composite, you got 2 swing point lows sitting down here. They're clustered. You got 3 swing point highs sitting up here. They're clustered. Whichever way this breaks, it's probably going to carry. And so one has to watch both sides of it until you get a clear signal which way it's going to go. Right now, if I had to be a betting man, I'd be betting on the top side. That's what the indexes look like. Now I want to flip over to the world markets, and I want to look at some of them to see what they're doing. So I'm going to start with Australia, the All Ordinaries. Okay, so they go over the high. They're coming back. They're doing a retest, regenerate now. That bottom is 51.26. You got 8.4 on it. The breakout bar had 8.4. You're coming back with 8.7. You're coming back with 8.5. That's a tight one, and so far it's holding. So far this is a retest and regenerate higher so far. Again, we're at the cusp here on a lot of these, and they're all hanging here together. Let's flip through them all though, the big ones. The N225, the Nikkei. So the Nikkei makes a nice big push up, comes back. And let's look at it on a weekly. Okay, so that big bar, 1164. Yeah, so you come back into it, you have no volume, and you bounce right back out of it. That wants to try to go higher on a weekly view. And on the daily, yeah, I can test a little bit lower and then try to flip around and go higher. Let's look at Taipei. Now, we've had big moves in our chip stocks. Taipei is a chip country, and you can see it in the chart. Big, nice strike up into resistance. Yeah, that's actually a nice looking push. Let's see what the weekly looks like. Okay, so volume expanding as you're coming up. That swing point high here has got 12.3 on it at 82.65. We're trading at 81.60. So another 100 points up. You're doing 10 on the way up. That's going to be tough to get over, but it's possible. We'll have to see how it expands. But it does look like it's going to come up. It already broke this swing point confirmed trend. Normally when you get some sort of a confirmed trend after an extended move like this, you get some sort of pullback. But if you look at this, you actually have an ABCD up that measures quite high. You got A point down here. That's 77.61. The B point is 81. That's about 450. The C is here. That gives you about 8,500. Takes you right to the top, folks. Right over the top, 8,200. So you can see it's going to go right after them all and try to break them all. So that one actually looks positive as well. And let's go look at the Indian market, which has been devastated of late, but the government's starting to intervene on it, and we're seeing a push up as a result. Going after a swing point high again, got volume expanding, and it's an ABCD up also. A point, B point, C point. Measures up into that swing point high, probably test both of them. You got two clustered together. So even the rupee devastation isn't enough to keep India down, because like all of them, the governments just walk in here, they waltz in, and they start pushing the strings to make things go higher. It's that way everywhere. Here's the Hang Seng. Hang Seng's after the top. It looks like it's just about to break it. 22,695. And what do you got there? You got about 22.1. You're going into it with 21 and 19. Doesn't look like it's got the volume. Probably going to pull back into the support zone. Let's look at the weekly. Okay, so the Hang Seng weekly, you can see it's coming after this bar. And here it actually does have the volume on a weekly. So, and that would be an ABCD up if it can get over it. I would expect some sort of a little retrace, and then on the dailies, and then you go after it again, try to push over it. That is a big ABCD. The bottom of it is 19,426. I take that back because actually it's from here to there. So that one just completed, so it'd only be from here. It's not that big. I looked at it wrong. So that one only gets you up, towards the swing point high. But it's a nice run. It's a nice run it's got going here. It's still looking pretty good. And as you know, last week we saw lots of data come out. We talked about it last Sunday. The flash indexes coming out, PMIs, showing us that you're getting expansion across the world, more so than people expected. And that is what underpinned this market last week. Despite all the Syrian news, despite all of the Fed tapering worries, despite who's going to run the Fed, is it going to be Janet Yellen? Is it going to be, I couldn't remember Yellen's name this morning. Now I can't remember the other one. Anyway, the whole question about who's going to run the Fed, and those issues are going to be out there. They're overhang, right? And they keep the market suppressed to some extent. Let's go look at Europe right quick. So in Europe, okay, so this is the CACs. Let's see here. So it comes down, it tests. The low there was 937. You tested with 838. That was a good test, hammer reversal. That's going to go higher. It's going to push right up to that swing point high. I wouldn't be surprised to see it get there this week. 40.72. We're trading at 40.49. It's 30 points away. They'll get there. It's 1%. They'll hit that and they'll go after the highs. So this, just like our NASDAQ composite, is setting up with a couple clustered swing points at the highs. And that's always dangerous if you're on the short side, because they can spike this thing up. This did a retest, regenerate also. Suspect breakouts, comes immediately back, does the retest. The bottom was 39.38. We got as low as 39.33, so we got underneath it. We did 3.3 under 5.1. That's the reversal. That's a good retest. That looks like it wants to regenerate on the weekly, and that jives with what you're seeing here on the daily. So the CACs wants to try to go higher. Let's look at the Footsie. Now the Footsie had been doing some sort of a rounding bottom, still doing it. And the big bar on it is the breakdown bar from the 15th. Okay, the high on that 64.60. Let's look at the weekly. Okay, so you come down. You don't have a lot of volume here. You left the tail at the bottom. You tested it, then left the tail at the top. You reverse it. You have volume on the push back up. So on the weekly, it looks like a clean turn. On the daily, it's just drifting around. I would think it's going to try to at least test the top of this, which is resistance, 65.87. And we're trading at 65.47, so that's less than 1%. So that's the target, right? Go test that. If you can get over it, go test the high, which is the top of resistance. The DAX. Okay, on the German DAX, what do we have? We have volume pushing up again, just like the others. The big bar down to the 27th here as well. You go into it, you got volume, you stay into it. That's saying you're going to try to get to the top of it more than likely. And here again, clustered swing point highs at the top. That's another thing that you want to watch as it gets back up there. So the target on the DAX is the top, 84.23, which is where the swing points lie. Let's see on the weekly. On the weekly, it's not as clean cut because you actually left a little bit more volume on your reversal. So not ideal, but I don't know if that's going to stop it or not. The data looks like we're going to get up and test a little bit higher. Okay, so world markets seem to be saying the same thing in that they want to try to go higher. Let's flip over to our OX markets first. If we have time, we'll come back to the sectors. All right, so let's start with the bonds. Okay, the TLT, as we've been talking about, they had a big bar, some volume come in that tells you there's some interest, right? They come down, they test the bottom of it, they get under it, they flip back over it, back under it, less volume. This still looks like it's going to do some more testing. And on the weekly, you can see the huge downdraft, and now you're down here trying to test. Notice that the volume was lighter last week. The key will be is, do they test this bottom and hold it? If they do, folks, I do think this thing is trying to turn, and it's going to base out and start probing to the upside if that's what happens. And so this is, again, there's multiple things to watch. You want to see if the NDX can break higher. You want to see if the broad composite follows. You want to see strength come into the Russell. If those things happen, SPX Dow Jones is going to get pulled higher. You want to see if the bonds hold, right? Because if interest rates start shooting up, and that's what will happen if this breaks lower, that's going to put another damaging arrow in the market trying to get higher. With the uncertainties and higher interest rates, it makes it very much harder, right? So the bonds, you got to watch the bonds. Let's go look at silver and gold. Gold was trying to push back up after getting hammered back down. Now remember, gold had made a nice run. It made, what is that run? 114 to 136 or so. So you're pushing 24 points on a 114 base. That's a 20% move in the metal in 8 weeks. That's significant. Right? That's not insignificant. That is significant. If you look at the stocks, they did 40. When you do that, you usually have to base out for a little while when you have had a big downtrend, which is what gold has had. And so even if this is going to put in a base and work higher, you got to think there's going to be some work to get there. It's probably not going to be a V move right back up. Although I've seen so many V moves, it's like a V movie anymore. It happens over and over and over. But this thing goes up, there's a lot of resistance over here, it goes into zone, it fails. I'd still think it's going to try to come back to the bottom of this at least. That's 130.51. 130 brings you back down into back into these highs. That would make sense to come back into those. Not that much farther. So a little bit farther, and then we'll see what it's made of. In particular, test this bar. Bottom of that breakout bar, right? That's your retest, regenerate on the highs. That bar is the one that has the volume. That's the one you want to measure against as it comes back. 17.2 there. If you can come into that bar, get deep into it, test that swing point high, maybe even test this one a little bit, and not have any volume, you want to jump all over it and ride it back up, either here or potentially in the stocks themselves. Let's see if silver's telling the same story. Okay, silver, yeah, silver looks about the same. And if I look at it on the weekly, yeah, pretty much the same. Came into the big bar on a weekly and held. So they still look good. They just need some work. They just need to base out. You'd love to see this one come back and test this bar as well, the 815 bar. I'm going to flip over now to the sectors right quick and see what they look like. Okay, so if we start with the transports. Okay, what do we got here? So on the daily, it's just a mess. Going into resistance, can't hold. Friday was a pretty good day up, and then they sold it off at the end. The S&P's lost about almost 9 points into the close. Yeah, so remember this came down, did a test on that retest, on this support zone. It's anchored by this big swing point high, and it looks like anchored by this low. And the volumes are there, and there's nothing coming back. So that, still looks okay, nothing bad. Semiconductors been pushing up. I've switched over to using the SMH. Have a little bit more volume in it, so we get a truer tell. And so that just looks like a bounce out of nowhere, right? Man, it bounced indeed when you look on the daily. There's nothing special here. I mean, you went over under after an extended move. This thing can pull back some. So stocks probably won't be the helper to the NASDAQ. It's going to have to be Apple and Google and even Microsoft. Okay, so if we look at, what do we got here? The XLB, so the materials. Well, they're just hanging at the highs. These guys haven't even backed off. So materials look like they're going to work harder. The XLE. See, most of these have pushed volume on Friday, even though they closed under it, they pushed more volume. And that means that they can try to push again. Got a swing point high, trying to get over it still, can't quite do it. If you break that one, you got one more at the top and another one there. So again, if you look at the NDX and you look at the Dow, there you have these clustered swing points. Well, you have it here too on the XLE. So if you got a sector that looks to try to break, it's your oil sector. And that has a lot to do with Syria, I'm sure, right? Unrest in the Middle East. Financials. Let's see what they look like. Okay, so the same thing. At top was 1992. You got to it, you fell back. Pushing some volume. That's a tough resistance zone. So this one's key too. Here's another one to watch, because you got a swing point high here. If you can get over that, then that really changes trend. Right now you got sideways. You got sideways on a lot of these, are bearish on a few. And a change of trend is a big deal. And so if the SPX is going to push, these guys are going to have to go with it. If you look at it on a weekly, it doesn't look nearly as devastating. I mean, it just looks like consolidation up here. So I don't, like most of the market right now, I don't see the market in the light that so many commentators do. I just don't see it as that bad. Yeah, you've had a pullback. Okay, you had a friggin' run about 18%. I mean, give me a break. 5 off of that is nothing. Matter of fact, if you don't give some back, then you're going to end up giving a lot of it back at some point. So a lot more than 5%. XLI doesn't look bad here. It's pushing a resistance, and again, very slight consolidation on the weekly. That still looks pretty good. The XLK is the technology. Now it doesn't look nearly as strong as you're seeing on the NDX, and that's because the NDX is so weighted by Apple. Apple's such a big piece of it. Apple's got one of their conferences this week. They're going to unveil some products. Usually they run up into that. I need to look that date up. If somebody has that date and wants to pop it in, that'd be great. Because that will be another thing to watch this week. Because usually you run up into it and then you sell down. So it's got some swing point highs up here. Yeah, that's not really telling us anything either. XLP. Let's see what this one is. This still looks like a failure. It never did quite test that bottom. It would have been better had it. Didn't have any volume as it went down there. That bottom also would be a key area to hold because of a swing point low, because that would be the first one to break on this time frame. It would go bearish. So again, something to watch. Whichever way we break, the sectors are probably going to tell us the story. So XLE breaks higher, XLF breaks over that swing point high, XLK starts to run towards the highs, then you know we're probably breaking higher, right? And the indexes, because they're concentrated, the NDX is the one to see there. On the downside, the XLP and the XLU, and they're mainly tied to the interest rates, and if you start to see interest rates move, they're going to get hurt again. This looks like a nice big rounding top. I wouldn't be in this anymore if you still are. It's just not the place to be. You've got to find a way out of it if you're still holding on. XLV gets over the swing point high, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So the XLV wants to try to push back up towards the highs. Did a retest regen on the weekly, right? Off the breakout bar, off the swing point high, has no volume in comparison. That looks like a successful retest and regenerate back to the top side. And the XLY, let's look at that. Consumer discretionary, battling with the swing point highs, pushing it with volume. That looks like it's going to get over it, doesn't it? That, well, look at this. That also has this big bar to deal with too. That's what's causing this. Big gap, huge volume. So if it gets over it, that will be a tell, because then it will try to run back up to the tops. Here just looks like consolidation, and you're actually pushing pretty decent volume. So a run back up to this I 6019. If I go back over on the daily, 6019 is back up into here. You can see that that's really going to be the test, but it's got to get over this bar on the daily. Okay, so when I look at all these markets, you know, last week, Tuesday, if you were on here, you heard my comments. My comments were, this thing's going lower, right? The setup is to go lower. Go test those lows again, see if we can break them out. Wednesday we wake up, the market skyrockets, goes straight up Wednesday morning, doesn't even look back. I mean, if I pull up a chart, I got the SPX here, let's put it on 10 days. This is the Wednesday trade, right? 9.3, let me see, Wednesday would have been 9.4. So this was we coming back. This is us coming back after the world had traded higher. We spike straight up, sell off the rest of the day, get a little bounce at the end. That looked like a failure. It looked like we're going to go lower, right? And then what happens? The very next thing that happens is that you turn around, right, on Wednesday, and you just skyrocket, right? Never look back. A lot of gyration on Friday's employment numbers, but again, they pushed it up again, made new highs again. This thing just looks like it wants to try to work higher, and that's my view at this point. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Let's let her rip, see what she wants to do this week. September 10th, and on the on the Apple. So on the Apple, looks like we got cut off. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, folks. Have a great night. Good night.